You may begin.
Welcome to the college of complexes. Can you hear me all right? No? You can't hear me?
Too much talking.
But they've gotten all that. But he's still.
Turn 1 and 2 up a little bit.
Not till the squeak.
Welcome to the college. Can you hear me now?
He worries about Patrick.
Huh?
I
No?
was just a kid.
Not working? It is working?
Yeah, we can hear
Can you hear me?
No, you don't hear it.
Just your live voice.
Yeah.
How about now? Any better?
Are they on?
I don't know. As far as I know they are.
louder.
Well, tap them.
Oh, I didn't think of that. This one's on.
I can hear it.
Yeah, I heard some sound.
Yeah, it's on.
Testing 1, 2. Can you hear me? All right. Well, we'll do it anyway. Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 407th meeting since we started in February 2009. This actually started in Chicago in 1951 for the purpose of solving all the world's problems. They're still working at it. We started here in February 2009. We put a different speaker in every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view that had to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter that we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker. And we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. When our speaker gets the last word, he gets comment and close the meeting. That's how it works. But we don't. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time. Get it out of your system. If you want to get an announcement you want to make? Jen, he wants to hear. Cold out.
Baby, it's cold outside.
Any other announcements? Anyone else have an announcement they want to make?
I'll make one.
All right.
Philosopher's Forum is having a meeting on the 10th, which is Tuesday, at the El Phoenix at Skillman and Adelia, and we're having a talk about the roots of money. So,
Who is
we are Philosopher's Forum. We're going to have a speaker talking about the roots of money.
What time?
7:30 at the El Phoenix at Skillman and Adelia.
$5.
$5, that's correct. Was that? The 10th, yeah, Tuesday.
Any other announcements?
By the top.
Well, I got that out of your system. Now, next week is April 14th. Calvin Bluet's going to talk about making the Affordable Care Act, ACA, more efficient. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. And following week is from blind spot to personal growth. That's Jan Lee. She's a PhD in anthropology and a Mandarin teacher. She'll be talking here. And the following week, April 28th, on global status of human rights, that's Dr. Rick Halpern. Incidentally, he was the first speaker we had. That's 400 and some speakers ago in 2009. So anyway, he's back. But tonight we have John Beesley. He's going to talk about on the character of U.S.-UK culture. He's an English-born author, retired after a long career with Xerox. Educated at London's Imperial College and the University of Dallas. He's got a BSc, BIC, BMBA, PhD. We'll discuss how the 6 G's describe the main characteristics of U.S. culture. He will point out that the UK is bedeviled by only 3 of them, which is, of course, 3 too many. John will argue that if America is to stand any chance of being made great again, to coin a phrase, a good look at the mirror is required. He further argues that laissez faire, the art of doing nothing but wishful thinking, is not helpful, as if you don't know where you're going, there's little chance of you getting there. John points to solutions and concludes that the British have always relied on muddling through, expecting that something will turn up. However, even a blind squirrel can find a nut once in a while, so perhaps all is not lost. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to John Beesley.
God, guns, gold, greed, government.
Well, thank everyone for showing up on this cold and frosty April spring-like day. So anyway, I'm going to give a chat about some cultural differences and similarities between the land of my birth, England, and the glorious state of the Union here, America. When I get my portfolio the right way round, we shall start. Okay. So anyway, some of this is tongue-in-cheek and some of it is serious. I'm going to let you guess what parts are what. The English are known to be very sarcastic. In fact, that's one of our great defense weapons. In high school, there was no peer pressure because everybody was insulting everybody else, you see. So, anyway. All right, well, actually, get the right space. Anyway, so let's start off with Great Britain. In the 16th century, of course, with the great wave of English exploration, and so the British island nation, surrounded by sea, got in its ships and sailed around the world, taking its language and culture with it. And so even today, because it founded lots of colonies as it went about, and it had wars with almost everyone while doing it. So it took its culture about everywhere. And so even today, there's remnants of this culture around the world. Now, even America, that departed over 200 years ago, still has some remnants of what I'll call Britishness. Whereas many of the colonies, which became independent in the 50s and 60s, have a sort of a more up-to-date version of Britishness. So they have proper parliaments and so on and so forth. It makes them even more amenable, I think, to right thinking. So America, you see, has a sort of a watered-down version of what was going on in Britain in the 17th century. So in fact, its constitution and Bill of Rights was really lifted from what happened after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And of course it's been stuck in aspic ever since, unchanged, more to the pity. So anyway, so that's a preamble of the general travel of culture as they spread around the world, mostly from Britain. But there are other countries like France, Portugal, also did similar things. But tonight I'm going to focus on some characteristics that all begin with G. And the first one I'm going to start off with is God. Because in America, God plays a tremendously important role. So this concept of a supreme authority responsible for creating and monitoring the universe is central to the spiritual and political life of America. Now this is somewhat unusual in the fact that about 50% of Americans regularly go to church. In England, the corresponding number is about 10%. In Scandinavia, it's about 4%. So really, it's somewhat unusual. Now, of course, the politicians in the US, as we all know, often proclaim their religious affiliation, often loudly, whereas in the UK, they almost never do. I mean, Tony Blair, for example, one of our late lamented prime ministers, was a closet Catholic. He kept it secret, actually, never mentioned it, because he said that if I did, people would think I was a nutter, which that's translated to be a nutcase. Now, Alistair Campbell was Blair's spokesman, and he said one day, "We don't do God." And therefore, religion is sort of kept in the background in the UK. People go to church, they're sort of, but actually Catholics do, and now Muslims, everyone. And it's okay, it's never really discussed very much. But over here, it really plays a central role. Now, of course, why is this? Well, one of the reasons is, of course, of the Pilgrim Fathers. They had this very eclectic view of religion. In fact, when they came, they had very unornate meeting houses. They were sort of wooden shacks. And the church they had wasn't hierarchical, but they had this very sort of Puritan view, strict view of religion, which I think has permeated since. And so that explains somewhat why America is the way it is. So then I'll talk about what I call the God theory, which has many flavors, in fact. But inevitably, no matter which religion you look at, there was always a holy book. And of course, each book, is supposedly has been written by divine inspiration. Because the Jewish people have the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and the Muslims have, I got that wrong. Muslims have the Quran, the Mormons have the Book of Mormon. In fact, Joseph Smith, outside Rochester, New York, I went to a Palmyra festival. It's quite impressive. Apparently, he went up on this mountain and found these tablets that form the basis of the Book of Mormon. And the Christians, of course, have the Bible. Now, it's curious, the Bible is comprised of two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Why I say it's curious is because, of course, in Britain, it's basically we're all nominal Church of England. It's almost as if we're deciding, well, let's make the history of Britain into, an Old Testament and so on, because basically the Old Testament is nothing more than the history of the Jews, whereas the New Testament is the story of Jesus Christ. Now, I maintain, of course, that the two are totally different, very different in character and very different in message. But basically, if you look at the Bible, now there's sort of the brief outline of what it's about. It says, well, the heaven and the earth were created in 6 days. On the seventh day was rest and sanctification. And then in the Garden of Eden, Adam was created, and a little bit later, Eve was created from Adam's rib. And of course, there was a serpent, a sort of devil-like figure in the garden, and he deceived Eve, who in turn deceived Adam, and persuaded them both to eat from the tree of knowledge. And this act was, of course, in disobedience to what God had said. So this was the form of original sin, which all the descendants of the human race have collective guilt over. So there's been this collective punishment and guilt ever since. Of course, the 7 deadly sins came somewhat later, and then 2 millennia ago, Jesus was born, and he was the Son of God by a virgin birth from the Mother Mary. And he is deemed to be a savior who died on the cross to redeem these original sins and other sins that may have been committed along the way. And so with Jesus' grace, if we obey all the religious rules and so on, then we are then eligible to go into the kingdom of heaven. So that's sort of an outline of what the Bible says and how Jesus came to be connected with the Old Testament. And so these concepts of really sin and punishment come from the Old Testament. And whereas the New Testament is entirely different. It's more about brotherly love, forgiveness, and compassion, and simple kindness. And I maintain that there's a reason for that, because I think Christianity came from a totally different root from the Jewish religion. Thus, many Christian faiths, in fact, pay no attention to the Old Testament, and they go by what's written in the New Testament. And so, because of the way America was founded by the Puritans, this country has an Old Testament religion about its beliefs and so on. And so what I say, and Ted Cruz is a supreme example of someone who is deeply religious but profoundly unchristian. Let me repeat that. He's an example of someone who is deeply religious but profoundly unchristian. And of course this is reflected in the US criminal justice system. Basically, 3 strikes and you're out, you're gone. If you're a youthful offender, especially a minority, and you get paper written on you, you're like Harry's forthright throughout your life. You're almost never forgiven for youthful indiscretion. Now, every day in England, we've recited in assembly, morning assembly, the Lord's Prayer. And what it says is, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, that part of the Lord's Prayer seems to be largely forgotten over here. And it shows itself up in the for-profit prison punishment system that is really more about punishment than rehabilitation and forgiveness, especially in Texas, where it's almost inhuman what they do. Now, Steven Weinberg, the Nobel laureate in physics, talked about good and evil. He said that good people do good things, and bad people do bad things. But it takes religion to make good people do bad things. And so the great religious hook, and a hook is known in marketing. What a hook is what actually gets your attention and makes you want to do something. Well, of course, in religion, the great hook is the notion of the afterlife. The fact that there's some better place to go to. Where really, it's quite clear what the afterlife is. And of course, the afterlife is children, who we hand on our genes and pass the generation. That's the afterlife. And so, when I look at what the baby boomers have done to the younger generation, they've passed on a very, very poor hand, where living is much more, jobs are much more precarious, the standard of living is going to be lower, and life expectancy is less. So they've almost, the baby boomer generation, has cancelled the future. And so the family values often get touted by the religious people, really cannot thrive on this self-imposed sabotage of the American family. A truly Christian nation would ensure that families came first, rather than the profit maximization for the few that we see and deplore, as we should. Now, the right wing in the UK also do not ever play up religious values, but they do denigrate the poor. And of course David Cameron, who was Prime Minister from 2010 until a year or so back, was always talking about the scroungers who are mumping off the poor, hard-working people. Never mind that his policies of austerity caused the recession, after the 2008 crash. But all they did, this government, was to cut benefits to the poorest and the disabled. And so these people who often talk about religion, they don't, as I say, they're not Christians, in my judgment. But of course, the right wing in England and here are always given special deference, and of course, special rewards, and I'll get to that later. Now, a state religion, when you have a state religion, imposed religion, what you have is a theocracy. And so states actually use religion as a force of coercive control and punishment. And of course, we saw misguidedly that when these Arabs in Arab countries in North Africa began to revolt, it was held that this is a dawn of democracy. And so when these countries got the vote, especially Egypt, all they really wanted was a theocracy. And so now Saudi Arabia is a prize example of a theocracy supported by America. And of course they founded this extreme form of Islam called Wahhabism. And of course they set up madrasas all over the Far East and Middle East. And of course these madrasas taught this extreme form of Islam that gave rise to the Taliban and also ISIS, which is the most deplorable acts you've ever seen, you've ever heard of. But yet again, it's a state religion. Now, of course, we have havoc in Yemen, funded by the two warring religions, factions in the Middle East, the Shia, supported by Iran, and the Sunni, supported by Saudi Arabia. And that country now is being ripped to bits by these warring factions of this religion. Now, another major characteristic of theocracies is that women are punished. And especially in countries like India and Pakistan, to this day, you have honor killings. If a male member of the family commits some kind of crime, then it's usually the woman is sacrificed for that. And so, also, of course, it's strange, you know, you go into a Christian church and so men have to take their hats off, but women have to cover their hair. Now, of course, in the more extreme religions, they have to cover their face, their arms, legs, and even eyes. And of course, in West Africa, religion dictates that there's the practice of female genital mutilation goes on, because they were punishing women for sexual proclivity and so on. So killing young believers is another facet of what religion does. In fact, on the streets of London several years ago, two late converts to Islam decided to express their faith by hacking to death a UK trooper on the street in broad daylight. And so the Catholic Church, of course, is also a paragon. In fact, it's, as we know, it's covered up pedophilia. And of course, the nuns have been selling children in Ireland. These children from unwed mothers who committed the sin of being unwed. In fact, Jane Russell, the famous actress, sold an Irish child. Now, if all this is not evil, I don't know what is. It's certainly not Christian, in my book. So we're on to the second G. It's called guns. Now, of course, guns have a special place in the vast mythology of America. The Colt 6-shooter, the Springfield rifle, the weapons that tamed the West. And of course, the rugged individuals have conquered the West, went there and slaughtered the Indians, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, the people that came from Europe never went anywhere near the West. They basically landed in the eastern states, and most of them never left that state. They simply didn't go anywhere near the West. Now, of course, the UK also had a native people. When the ice retreated, the people of Spain, northern Spain and France and Denmark and so on followed the ice northwards. So they became the Celts, they became the people of Great Britain. And then, of course, after that, 2,000 years ago, the Romans came, and then later, and the Saxons and the Jutes, and then 1066, the Normans invaded. Well, that was way before guns were invented. And so, by the time guns were invented, the land was clearly peaceful. And the people didn't have any special affection or regard for guns. In fact, it's more likely that the case that the ruling class, the aristocrat class, wanted to keep guns out of the hands of the people because it would jeopardize their position in society. Now, guns are used in Great Britain, but of course they're all strictly regulated. One of the most famous occasions, of course, is the glorious 12th, and that's when the grouse shooting season opens up. And it's open for a few months until December. Also, we used to have fox hunting, which, as Oscar Wilde said, it was the unspeakable in pursuit of the uneatable, and it still goes on today, more or less. Frowned upon, but it still goes on. So, but in England, hunting really is the preserve of the aristocratic class. I mean, because to get togged up in your hunting gear and have, a string of horses is pretty expensive business, and having a Purdy shotgun for your grouse shooting is also fairly expensive. Now, also the US state has also various regulations concerning specific seasons when you could go hunting animals and birds. About the only season they don't have is killing their fellow human beings. That's never out of season. And of course, the carnage in the US is really horrific. 40,000 deaths a year due to firearms. A mass shooting, if you define it as where 3 or more people are killed or wounded in one incident, 9 days out of 10 in America, you have a mass shooting. And so what is the most prevalent thing with firearms in America? Well, over 2/3 of all death by firearms is suicide. And so when Americans rush out and buy a weapon to defend themselves against terrorists and so on and so forth, the most likely thing they're going to do with that gun is kill themselves. It's the most probable thing. Now, of course, England, doesn't have this culture of guns, and the firearm death rate is about 50 times less because of that. So when you tell a British person, look, yeah, that's why I like, because there's so many guns around. Actually, it's amazing to me that so many people are still alive in America. And now we get to the famous Second Amendment. So let me read this masterpiece. I told you there would be some funny bits. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Now, there are 2 subordinate clauses in this statement. I mean, it's very poorly written. And the rule about subordinate clauses, you can leave things out, turns out it should make sense. Well, why don't we leave out the 2 subordinate clauses, and you get a well-regulated militia shall not be infringed. Sounds reasonable. Let's leave out another one. And you've got a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state shall not be infringed. So, the right of the people, and look, listen to the word people. It doesn't say the right of every individual, it says the right of the people. So what they're really talking about, especially in the late 18th century when this was written, remember, it's a very sparsely huge country. It didn't have a huge militia, a standing army. So like Switzerland, it said, okay, citizens, you can have your arms to have a well-regulated militia. Well, I think the US spends 5 times as much as any other country combined. I think if you combine all countries, they spend 5 times as much as in all the countries combined on weapons. It certainly has enough weaponry to protect itself. And so now, a peculiarity to America is the fact that many people feel, especially in the South, that they need to protect themselves against their own federal government. They've got this idea that the federal government is somehow an enemy and is going to come and take away all their liberties, which is a very strange notion in a country that's deemed to be democratic. And of course, all this started really and got going with our friend Ronnie Reagan, who announced that government is the problem of everything, you see. And therefore, you have a right to defend yourself against it because it is doing bad things to you individually. Now that's a very strange notion, not really shared in the United Kingdom. You might dislike the Prime Minister, but you don't imagine that the government is going to come and take your liberties away. In fact, actually, after 9/11 and the Patriot Acts, the right wing certainly did infringe on lots of liberties. And so that deals with guns. The next thing I'll talk about, another G, is called gratuitous violence. So what is gratuitous violence? Well, violence is unnecessary and uncalled for. I think that this gratuitous violence is really the pornography of America, really. When you go and see films, this violence and blood and gore is thrown in just to make the story. And as you sit there and listen to the people around you, they're enjoying it, they're laughing. So there's a sort of a sickness about this thing. And of course these modern video games are just full of it. And then you wonder why teenagers become violent, have these strange notions of grabbing a gun, an AR-15, and shooting their fellow schoolmates. It's not surprising in this pornography of violence. Now, in the 50s, the BBC wouldn't show graphic violence, just wouldn't do it. Now, of course, it's crept in because, culture does move. Now, because of the rise in immigration in England, we have seen a rise in knife violence, killings by knife, but not guns. Now, the US in general, because, I heard some guy on the radio says, well, we like to go around the world and kick butt. So really, America seems to have the view that diplomacy is the last resort when violence has failed. And of course, diplomacy can fail, as happened in Munich when Prime Minister Chamberlain went to try to appease Hitler. And of course, there was no appeasing Hitler. But the US has suffered, tremendous defeats with its gunboat diplomacy. I mean, Vietnam should have been a lesson. It suffered a colossal defeat after it bombed the country. Well, the lesson was you can't bomb a country into submission. But that lesson has not been learned, apparently. And so, we come back to the Old Testament again, right? We must go around the world punishing bad guys. Thou shalt not kill seems to be forgotten. And of course, in all these wars that go on, God seems to be on both sides. So perhaps he has some schizophrenia about him up there. One doesn't know. Maybe I'll find out one day. So that's guns. And now we come to greed. Another G. Just in passing, I say the Republican Party, its platform seems to be God, guns and greed. I think that's its major policy platform. And of course, what we've seen is greed beyond avarice, really. And it really destroys everything. And that's what we've lived through in the past few decades. So during the past few decades, the 1% have taken almost every bit of gain into GDP. And in fact, their wealth is increased by about 6% a year, whereas the GDP has grown by about 3%. So they've taken the lion's share of it all. And it's estimated that this goes on by the year 2030, they will own 2/3 of all the wealth. And there doesn't seem to be any plan of stopping that. Now, what I think people are most concerned about is the fact that these very wealthy individuals have undue political influence. And in fact, we know that. We know that they fund the K Street lobbyists who write, mostly all the legislation gets written by these people. So what you have is a massive corruption, really, in the state. And of course, if this level of, well, I'd say wealth stealing hadn't happened, then the median income in America would be over $90,000 a year, whereas it's just over 50. So the average person would be a damn sight better off and a lot happier, and you probably wouldn't see the rise of the right wing and so on, and even the left wing. Now another factor in all of this is why it happened.
Bullshit.
Well, thank you, sir. We beg to differ. We'll come to stock options. Now, stock options are what are given to the managers. And they were given originally to align, so the managers would align with the owners of the company. Now there are several things wrong with that. The first is the fact that with high frequency trading, the average ownership of the stock is 20 seconds. So who are these owners that the management are aligning with? Basically, there are no owners as such who worry about the long-term interest of a company. The only poor buggers who worry about the long-term interest of a company are the average person who works there. The top echelon do not give a damn about the company's long-term prospects, and certainly Wall Street and these manipulators of shares don't either. And I'll elaborate on that. So what this has led to is ultra short-termism. Now, when you get I got a small stock option once. In fact, I think it was $135 a share. Unfortunately, Xerox plummeted in value down to about $20 a share. So much for my stock option. But what it does, well, let's talk about what really happens. The CEO basically is appointed. He usually is some kind of a lawyer or bean counter of some sort. Usually doesn't understand the business, but he does understand money. And so what he'll do, he'll say, well, how can I got this massive, in fact, the CEO of United Healthcare the other year walked off with compensation of $100 million. And that was largely stock option. And so when you're given that option that expires several years ahead, and what you do is you say, okay, well, I can manipulate the income statement and profit and loss. What I can do is I can sell off parts of the business, like buildings, and I can rent them back. That will flow to the bottom line. I can decrease R&D. That will flow to the bottom line. So I can show a steady progression in the PE ratio of the company. So that will boost up the value of my stock option. Now, of course, that will totally damage the future of a company when you do that. So now, that's one aspect of what goes wrong with greed. Another aspect is what's called the Walmart effect. Now, there was a chap who used to come here, Roy Allen, and this grey-haired gentleman is now gone northwards, but he owned quite a few garment factories in Texas. And one day Walmart came along and said, we aren't going to buy from you anymore unless you do your production offshore. And so that's what happened. They all went offshore. By the way, as they were doing this, the founder of on the Walmart truck said, "We buy American," okay? Well, that was disguised for many, many years. So they had a buying arm that was operating in China, and they never admitted it. Well, of course, after Clinton and his World Trade Deal, which admitted China as the World Trade Organization, and everyone started going to China, then of course it was open season for everyone. And as Ross Perot said, there was a very sucking sound as people went to Mexico and every place else. So that's another example of greed exerting its head. Now then we come to something called financial engineering, where a turnaround specialist comes along, and by the way, Mitt Romney was one of them. They take over a company, and the other name for this turnaround specialists is called asset strippers. So they look at the balance sheet, and they see the company has all these assets, usually land, buildings, something like that. As of course, when the Royal Post Office in England was privatized, the reason for that was it's got huge amounts of very valuable land in the middle of London, ready for tearing down, selling, and building luxury apartments, going for between 50 and 100 million each. So that's why that happened, and a few people walked off handsomely paid. And so this is what basically you have financial wizards who know nothing about the company, but they do understand the balance sheet and an income statement, and they see how they can asset strip. And so that's the game that Mitt Romney played. And by the way, this is the game that's been recently played in England with a company called Guess, Keane and Netherfold, a manufacturing company that's 200 years old. In fact, it made the cannonballs for the victory over Napoleon, Wellington's victory over Napoleon. So these asset strippers, Melrose Company, another gang of criminals from the City of London, came along and eyed up what this company would be worth. And so they've taken it over, and they're going to asset strip it after 5 years, sell it on after wrecking it. And so we come to the Wall Street in the City of London. Now the City of London is a city within London, and it's the financial capital. It's a square mile, and it has its own constitution, its own police, and it basically it's a gang of criminals. That's what they are. And so what is basically a rigged casino. Basically, there's a casino played with other people's money, with the proviso, tails I win, heads you lose, sort of a thing. And so what does it do? Well, its most potent asset is tax evasion. And of course, Britain has all these, the remnants of empire are richer than ever. The Cayman Islands and the Virgin Islands and Bermuda, the money that flows through is something like 30 trillion stashed away on these little islands. So you've got, so what are these outfits do in the City of London? By the way, every investment bank was British owned and now foreign owned in the City of London. Because after Thatcher, one of my favorite people, there's a zero regulation. None. No SEC. You basically come with, and that's why Joe Cassano, the chief wizard from AIG, who sold all these derivatives, insurances, with no money behind him, by the way, operated out of behind the Harrods in London, because there's no regulation at all, none. So he could do that, but what happened? So anyway, they engage in what's called money laundering for drug cartels, terrorists, people traffickers, crime syndicates, the lot. and they make a nice living out of it. So, but on a sort of a more local level, Warren Buffett, the son of Omaha, multi-billionaire, bought out Brahms, the ice cream milk shop, a few years back. Anyway, so since I'm the one that has milk, I buy a quart every day. A year or so back it was $1.29, and last week it was $1.59. A 23% increase. Now, I mean, that's on a small scale, but you can see the way it goes. There was a character called Martin Shkreli, okay, who's now in jail for 7 years. He took over a company that was making an AIDS drug, jacked up the price by 5,000%. And he went to jail. Now, why did he go to jail? Well, he went to jail because this company was a public company and he sold shares to the public. With that money, he paid back his private investors in the 2 hedge funds. He actually wrecked and lost money. So what he'd done, he'd taken money from the shareholders and paid back the debtors from his past financial misdeeds, and that is illegal. And that's why. So he wasn't jailed for jacking up the price 5,000%. Obviously, no, that's perfectly legal. But when you defraud your shareholders, that's illegal. That's why he went to jail. So this is a sort of the example of greed that goes on in the financial world and in this system. So we come to another G, it's called gluttony. And so the heavily subsidized US agriculture livestock overproduces, actually. Cheap food of questionable quality, and it's often tasteless because it's grown, picked before it's ripe, shipped around the country, winds up, and it's awful sometimes. The problem really is it's heavy in preservatives, sugar, hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, food coloring dyes, and plus many other chemicals that we don't know about. Because food is a visual thing. People like to look at nice looking food, and so this is why these chemicals are put in to make longer shelf life, make them look nice, and so on. And of course, you have supersized portions giving value for money. Now, I mean, we've got major health problems caused by this simple gluttony and bad food. So basically, you should avoid all processed food wherever possible. Go around the outside of the supermarket, buy vegetables, make sure you wash them and so on. Take the skins off. Now, the EU, in fact, the European Union, bans most of these foods from America because they have all these ingredients, these chemicals that they ban because they're very bad for you. And of course, the UK, now part of they also, obesity there is on the rise because food is fairly cheap. Now, of course, we have the FDA in America. Basically, it's the FDA versus corporate America. Guess who wins? Guess who wins? And so now more and more cheaper food is coming in from Asia. I'd say good luck, folks. So then we come to the last G. It's called gullibility. Now, it really does seem the world is full of people just waiting to be deceived. Really. For example, you have a shade tree mechanic who will repair your transmission for $50. A few examples. You have pharmaceutical companies that offer to cure all illnesses, make anybody more beautiful, have more sex appeal, and restore youth. Just take this pill. You have stockbrokers who offer investments that will give you 50% return in just 3 months. You have holy rollers who offer heaven, but not here on earth, but just give generously. You have cheap house painters who offer to paint the wall, but most of the paint seems to go on the carpet. You have politicians who have great slogans before the election, but these vanish once they're elected. A chicken in every pot. You have right-wing politicians and their media cronies. They're called what was the phrase? Media prostitutes or something like that. Prostitutes. All right. Now, of course, the first, well, in this age, Reagan was able to blame the trade unions for being greedy, you know, and he blamed them for being greedy, and it was the trade unions that caused all this inflation, and therefore made America uncompetitive, which is why the industry had to go offshore to become more competitive. So that all started with our friend Ronnie. Now, back in England, the UK Tories managed to convince the public that the 2008 crash was caused by New Labour, who overspent, and therefore there was no room for manoeuvre once the crash happened. And of course, the cure of crash to recover the economy was austerity. And so, as the people do things, predict, you had a triple-dip recession. In fact, the debt and the deficit actually increased. And to this day, even though I think they came in power in 2010, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, a history graduate, more or less, with no numerate skills, obviously, said that you'd cure the deficit in 3 years. Well, they've not cured it yet, and that's why 8 years later. So much for his skill. Of course, Trump, of course, convinced the peasant class that all America's problems were caused by these dastardly foreigners, you know, who took advantage of the USA. So, you know, these immigrants, the terrorists, the trade deals, government overspending were all to blame. And the cure for all of this was more guns, more military, more trickle-down, more tax breaks for corporations, and more deregulation, and that would cure everything. Well, I would say the problem for all these things, you know, is much closer to home. And in conclusion, I think we can say that to actually see what's going on, America should take a great look in the mirror and start putting its own house in order. And a country that has been self-sabotaged by greed and the incompetent and the immoral class. And of course, there's my book. If you care to go on Amazon, people have it. It spells this out in more detail. I don't usually proselytize it, but it really is sad to see a country that sabotaged itself. It's a remarkable thing. And I thank you for coming, and that's the end of my speech. If you have a couple of questions, I won't answer them.
Sorry.
John, what was number 4?
Jesus.
What was number 4, the G?
I have a headache for a week.
Number 4 was greed.
What was number 3?
Number 3 was gratuitous violence.
Oh, and guns is, okay.
Guns was number 2.
5 was
gluttony. And 6 was gullibility.
So you left out government.
One of those things are government. Well, there's good government, bad government.
What were the first 3 G's?
Oh, did you miss it? Oh, God, guns, and gratuitous violence.
You mentioned the square mile city of London, which appears to be, in your attention, a bunch of what I think gangsters or crooks.
Yes.
Isn't that primarily owned by the Rothschilds or
Well,
what?
certainly the Rothschilds have a stake in it,
Yeah.
but what has happened is that back in the 50s when I was growing up, the city of London was really run by the aristocrat class. Okay, they were gentlemen, and the favourite phrase was, "My word is my bond." I mean, you shook hands,
Right.
and it was golden. Okay. Well, after Thatcher and rampant deregulation, what I call the financial spivs came in. A spiv is a British term that came into parlance after the Second World War. The characters would appear in Oxford Street, London, and open their suitcase. You see, Oxford Street, the main retail section, and they'd open up their suitcase and they'd be selling nylon stockings and other things that had fallen off the back of a truck. See? And they were called spivs, fast money merchants. Well, basically the city has been taken over. Well, actually, what it's done, it's corrupted all the professions, like lawyers and accountants and auditors and all the rest of it, because they're all part and parcel of what is really amounts to a giant criminality gang. I mean, basically, it's just corrupt. Because basically they're slicing off a part of every transaction. I mean, they're parasitic in their operations. I mean, they're totally, you can have a whole different financial system, that doesn't rely upon, stocks and shares and all the rest of it. I mean, especially because it's all manipulated. I mean, look what's happened to the market in the last month. I mean, it's been zipping up and down. Now, what is it going? It's totally ludicrous. I mean, do you realize that the value of a stock is based on all the future earnings, right? Well, how on earth can you predict all of its future earnings? I mean, you can't even predict next week, let alone a stream of earnings going off 5-10 years. I mean, but that's how you calculate the true value of a stock. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And of course, the president sneezes, and oh boy, it's bad. There was a marvelous, there was a kind of a satirical program it was very good a few years ago. And a guy being interviewed, and so he said, "What's your profession?" He said, "Oh, hey, a stockbroker." He said, "Well, what do you do?" He said, "Well, one day we tell our clients, buy, it's wonderful, wonderful." And a bit later on, we said, sell. That's right. So it's pump and dump and trash and cash, as they say. But it's so transparently manipulated that it really, and the salient point though, with all, especially the forex market, which I spoke about before, there's about 3 to 4 trillion a day goes through the forex market, the foreign exchange market. So currencies. What Keynes wanted to do was have stable currencies. If you are going to have this the same thing called globalization, you really should. You can't. I don't see how on earth you can trade when currencies shoot up over a year by plus or minus 20%. I mean, how on earth can you build a product and sell it when that's going on? But of course America didn't listen to Keynes, right? I didn't understand him for a start, but never mind. You do really need stable currencies.
My comment.
Question.
Is Bitcoin related to this?
Sorry?
Is Bitcoin related to this?
Well, Bitcoin is just another scam. Really. It's a fake currency. It's a fake currency. I mean, it's like the dollar. I mean, the dollar is a fiat country, as Albert often reminds us, based on the probity and the output of America, really. Now, as America is busily sabotaging itself, and now not producing anything, it's not surprising the dollar's going to lose value. In fact, one day it might just crash. And of course, we've got this trade war coming up, and with the Chinese, I think they've got what, 3 to 4 trillion in the U.S. currency. I mean, if they dumped it all at once, bad things would happen.
You missed the G. It's called government. Or do you believe that government is not a problem? And if so, why?
Okay, well, I think the premise really is that, as Abraham Lincoln said, it should be the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, we don't have that. What we have is a kleptocracy, which is a government of the ruling class, for the ruling class, and bugger everybody else. That's what we've got. And they've made a real hash of things. On top of which you've got the military-industrial complex. I mean, this so-called war on terror, I think it's clocked up something like 6 trillion in spending and commitments. For what purpose? Basically, it's really started off to promote the war on terror and also get into into the Iraqi oil fields, basically. That was what it was all about. And it's been a total disaster, as these things are. So, I mean, when we talk about government, look, if it were truly democratic, yes. But along the way, I think ever since Ronald Reagan, etc., we've lost democracy in this country. I mean, both parties basically support the system as is, which is why Obama spoke about the crimes of getting into Iraq and the crash. The crooks on the Wall Street never did a thing. Nobody ever expected him to, because in fact, the Wall Street are the paymasters. The Democrats, and the corporations are the paymasters of the Republicans. So what else did you expect to happen? Nothing. Yes, government is a problem when it's not democratic. In fact, my very first talk here was a subject called economic democracy. That's when people have control of their own lives because they have an ownership stake in their means of production, which I think Jim understands because he was such a company that had that. And I've mentioned this before. In England, John Lewis, who owned John Lewis Stores and Waitrose, is the most successful company and respected on the high street. It out-competes everyone, and it's totally employee-owned. I mean, they hire the CEO, they see what's going on, but we don't have that. But you'll get me back into talking about the American Constitution, which I've discussed before. I mean, it's set up to fail. It's set up to be a money-driven system. When you have this election cycle that goes on, every 2 years you've got the Congress turning over, you've got the presidential election. It absorbs money. And so how on earth can, Joe Sixpack have a say in all of this? He doesn't. Well, that's not democracy. So this is why people are so fed up with the government. They don't trust it, with good reason, because it's a sham. And many of you supported Trump. Well, look at the guys he's put around him. They're all millionaires and billionaires. Do you really think they care about the country? Do you really think that's the case? I don't. Hank?
Yes, I thought you were going to highlight the contrast between America and Britain, and that wasn't so clear. I mean, everything you said pretty much was leftist is good, and you used both the term rich, greedy bastard, billionaires, and elite for the opposite side, as well as peasant. So
You're right there, yes, true.
so you mix those together. I didn't hear too much about the Britain thing. I don't understand the contrast that I expected you to highlight.
No, well, I drew certain parallels actually between what goes on in the UK and what goes on here. I dwelt more on what goes on in America because obviously more interested. I mean, if I went on a long litany of what Tony Blair did and didn't do to destroy Great Britain, you would be bored by that. Okay, I have given talks about Margaret Thatcher, as you may remember, who did another party piece in destroying the country. So I dwell on what goes on in America, but then I was alluding to the fact that yes, similar things goes on, but not to the same degree actually, especially on the guns part and on the God part. I mean, it does not show up in the culture, you see, because it's just
Except Islam.
well, that's a new innovation, and again, that was because of greed. Okay, the reason for that was simple. The cotton industry, the textile industry, was based in Lancashire, and they did very well after the war because they were being far in the north. They still had production capacity. Well, after a while, of course, the companies that had been destroyed by the war gradually, Germany and so on, came back in production. So they decided that they needed a cheaper workforce. So they went to the cheapest source of workforce, and that was the poorest people in Pakistan. And they imported them by the tens of thousands. And there was an individual called Enoch Powell who said that the streets will run with blood, because he said, this culture you bring in is so different. It's just, one will never properly integrate with British culture. And when you go to these cities, it looks as if you're walking in Pakistan, actually. There are so many, and of course by the way, it was a failure to bring them in because even that wasn't cheap enough. So the whole cotton industry vanished, but the people are still there. They're sort of like a massive underclass. Because they came from the lowest peasants in Pakistan, they're not educated. They're just there, and it's a problem. It's a problem. So yes, I talked about that. As I say, 4 individuals who grew up in Leeds came down to London, and deciding to blow up the tube trains. And so they managed to blow up 4 tube trains. The Northern Line, my house is on the end of the Northern Line, it wasn't running as usual. And so this guy got on a bus and blew up a bus in the middle of Bloomsbury. I mean, these people have, it's driven by this extreme religion and the killing of unbelievers. I did mention that. So, you just have religion, I think, in many cases just drives people mad, actually. And we've seen this with ISIS and so on.
I was sure you were going to pick gold as one of the G's.
Well, I only had an hour, you see. I have spoken about gold. I gave a lecture about the gold.
You want to check?
The gold standard, actually. See, I've spoken about some of the, and I do talk about the structure of government many times, as people know. I don't like the American system. I think it's a replica of the 17th century in England, and we've moved on since then. Somebody like Trump and others could never be elected Prime Minister in England, ever. Because you can't have a person dragged off the street and run for president. He must be a member of a party. He must be an elected MP. And then,
Upper class. Upper class.
not necessarily. One of the more in the Labour Party that came into being after the war and kicked out Churchill's Tory party. You had people like Anara and Bevan who were miners, actually miners. They'd come up from the working class, but often they would go to college and so on. But many people were ordinary, so you don't have to be particularly wealthy to be elected to Parliament in England. Because money, you see, elections only last about 4 or 5 weeks. And so money, you can't just, there's not enough time to throw that amount of money in it. Yes, there's the rich Tory, well, of course, what we have in England is same. Here, you have the wealthy people owning the press. But of course, you do have the BBC, which is relatively independent. And until Reagan came along, the airwaves supposedly were fair and balanced. But of course, he put an end to that. Yes, I did.
I don't think you need, do I need the mic?
Yeah, you need it.
You do.
Do I need the microphone?
Yeah.
It's being
Hey,
recorded.
just confirm what you said about, I was born in,
You come from Lancashire, right?
I was born in Blackburn. I was in the ultimate town that you're describing.
Right.
Blackburn.
You could stand on a hill above Blackburn, it's down in a valley, and you could count the church spires. Last time I was in England, I stood on that hill, I could count the blue mosque, and the red mosque, and the gold mosque. Basically, I assume were paid for by Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Now then, the population of Blackburn is 30% Muslim, and the house I was born and raised in is owned by a Muslim, who happen to be good friends with him, is a Labour councillor of the City Council. But my question is, do you think we're entering a second Cold War? And what do you think is ultimately going to be the outcome, besides spending trillions and trillions more, wasting trillions and trillions and trillions more dollars on arms?
Well, I think the game plan really is to whip up the fear of war and thus spend, the military-industrial complex, will always want to spend more and more and more. I think I think we have a sort of a whipped up situation. Obviously, Putin is a dangerous man, obviously, but he's a weak man in a weak country, and to stay in power, he has to show strength by doing things around the world, like poisoning his fellow countrymen in England, like going into Syria, like invading the Crimea and so on. But remember, there was a deal done at the time of Glasnost where the US said, well, we won't have NATO right up to the borders of Russia. But they did. Also, some brilliant bright sparks from Harvard went over to Russia and privatized everything just as fast as they could. And that handed state industries to these criminal class that are now actually buying up huge parts of London as their nest egg, okay? And if they fall out with Putin, of course, he bumps them off. But are we entering a new era of Cold War? I think this is just a political game, actually. They realize that if they really did anything, then it's over. You can say goodbye to everything and everybody. But they like this war on terror, which I think was manufactured by Cheney and Rumsfeld, where the part of the military-industrial complex got even richer beyond avarice. $6 trillion going into this sinkhole. By the way, as you know, in Oklahoma, they've got textbooks that are 50 years old. They're under this clown, Pruitt, a lawyer and bloody, a dimwit, total dimwit. Comes from a state that's impoverished. Okay, he's deregulate everything. The guy's a menace, like most of these idiots. We should spend this money and invest it in Americans, in education. Okay, there certainly is enough money there. We got a healthcare system run by insurance companies, which is a crime in itself, a real crime, and it costs twice as much as it should because it's so inefficient. It can't help you if you don't have insurance. And even if you do, you're likely to be turned down for a procedure they don't want to spend, actually. And this happens every day of the week over here. And the guy at the head of it, United Healthcare, walks off with $100 million. There's something slightly wrong with that picture. Yes. So going back to your question, yes, this is a very tense situation, whipped up for gain, I think.
Given that Thomas Jefferson made the statement, if we ever let a private bank get control of our money, that through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land we have founded. Given that statement, I believe he was a time traveler from today, actually. The Federal Reserve is that threat that he named. Don't you think? And it has funded all of our warfare. All of these things that you've talked about has been funded through that Federal Reserve. Don't you think that is the very primary thing we need to eliminate in this country?
Well, I've spoken about that before. Yes, you cannot have a private bank controlling the monetary system of a country. Because that controls basically the economic life of the country. And of course, what they did, as you know, they bailed out these banks that should have gone bankrupt. So I would, the Federal Reserve is not federal, it's not a reserve. It's sort of an artifice, built on the system. Basically speaking, you don't really, it's almost like, you don't really need to collect taxes. You can do it all by just printing money, But again, what I proposed is you have an economic council that controls both the fiscal system and the monetary system, because these two levers really operate an economy. So these two things have to be run together. Ronnie Reagan was spending money like mad fiscally, and the Federal Reserve was clamping down, jacked interest rates up, 25-30%? The two things are going completely opposite directions. And that's about the most egregious example of things out of control. So, and what's happened because of the Tea Party, it was really left to the Federal Reserve and monetary systems to pump money into the system. But as we know, that money didn't go down to the small companies, actually. It didn't go down to bailing out people with their mortgages. It went into the banks, who then turned around and lent that money back to the Federal Reserve, and were making money on it. It was a totally crazy system. And surprising, really, America's gradually recovered from this system. But again, the reason it did was because Obama put in a 800 billion stimulus, and that's what dragged the country out of the recession. In England, as I mentioned, the opposite happened. They started this austerity program on the grounds that, boy, we don't have the money anymore. So they started, actually they gave a tax break to the rich, which is section, but they took away all the benefits from the disabled and so on and so forth. And of course, when you do that, you get a recession, and that's exactly what happened. But they were saying, no, it's this, we've got to bow down to the bond market, and because, goodness me, the bond market, goodness me, they dropped the interest rates down negatively. The bond market, actually, if you had a bond, when interest rates goes down, the bond value of the bond goes sky high. So actually, right on, right. So yeah, I mean, we agree on that, Albert, 100%. The Federal Reserve, it should be combined. You should have an entity that controls both, and it should not be privately owned, basically. And it should be run. It should be under. Transparency really is the watchword of government, and it's the watchword of the financial system. When you know what's going on, and these criminals can't get away with it, then it doesn't happen. And when you have regulations that make any of these things illegal, it certainly doesn't happen. So yeah, you cannot have deregulation and expect these bankers to be honest. I mean, they're so greedy, they can't stop stealing, actually. They just cannot stop stealing. It's in their nature. They see all this money flowing by, and they grab a bit of it one day, and the next minute they grab 2 bits, and the next minute talk about Bitcoin. Until in the end they're stealing so much that it distorts the whole economy, and it's parasitic, and it's counterproductive. This is why America doesn't invest in itself, because these bankers are using the money we put in our deposit accounts as a stake for their gambling operation. That's what they're doing. That's exactly what it is. So I agree, Albert, I agree, 100%. I would change it in a heartbeat. But then again, I would yes, Elizabeth.
Back to medical care. Could you describe to everybody what it is like in England for someone to utilize public health care versus going into one of these corporate kingdoms without insurance, without money, and how that goes?
Well,
which you're not treated, you are refused health care in this country at this present.
Well, in England, yes, in England, of course, we have the National Health Service that was created in 1948, right at the height of the most dire economic situation. You had free health care. I mean, obviously, you paid for it via taxes, free education, which I benefited, okay, and housing, which I benefited for a time. Now, so when you go into hospital, you don't walk out with a giant bill. You don't have a, no, what goes on here, what goes on here is your doctor will say, you need XYZ drug, but I have to have it approved. And so she talks to a peer doctor in XYZ insurance company, and the XYZ character in the insurance company, no, you can't have it, it's not approved. It's not in your formulary, okay? So you're out of luck. Now, in England, it doesn't happen. Now, what has been going on is the Tory party, the right party, has been dismantling the welfare state. It's been defunding the National Health Service in order to break it. Just like they sold off the Royal Mail, just like they sold off council housing, just like they have private education, where my college, my 3 degrees was all paid for. I mean, because very few people went to college. Damn it, you had to get into college through a stiff exam. A moron, upper class moron, couldn't get into Oxford or Cambridge or Imperial because he couldn't pass the exam. Okay, but if you had brains enough, they gave you money. Okay, so that's the way it works. Now, they're breaking the National Health Service by underfunding it. So in fact, they'll say it's not working, we're going to sell it off. It wouldn't surprise me if the buyer is United Healthcare, because they've already got people over there helping out. And so yes, this is what happens when the right-wing ideologues they wreck the country, but they become rich. And yes, Hank, I have lots of bad words to say about these people, okay? Because I've seen them operate. I went to college with them, and mostly they're worthless, these people. They're dimwits, they don't,
They're British, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure.
No, by and large, okay. By and large, what I would say about Americans is, they're very well intentioned, okay? Mostly they're good people, very well intentioned. And, but they've been badly misled by both parties. I couldn't bring myself to vote for any of them.
How come there is still a queen in England? How come you guys still tolerate royalty?
That is I am not exactly a royalist, but look at the alternative. Look, the Queen, as I say, after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, William of Orange was appointed joint regent, and he had power. Well, since we don't have a written constitution, we moved on 3 centuries later, whereby we have the royal family, we have the Queen. She has 0 power, okay? Now, in extreme circumstances, I think the Queen can intervene, but she's a figurehead, okay? The fact that the royal family during the war stayed in Buckingham Palace, which was bombed, okay? The fact that she herself became a car mechanic, okay, during the war, and knows how to fix engines, okay, says a lot about her. She's very well respected. And also, when she goes around the world to what's the Commonwealth, she can actually, represent the country. The fact that represent its culture, its lineage. There is in England, the Commonwealth, this link between Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, India, Pakistan, it is a tangible link. Okay, because so much of the culture. For example, if you go to Zimbabwe, you'll see lawyers with wigs. They call them perukes, okay? And it still goes on to this day. You will I meet people from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and they're so proud of getting their GCE certificate from University of London, which means something to them because it's set by the university. Okay. So you see these cultural links that I talked about earlier on does have meaning, and the Queen sort of represents that. Look, the history of England goes back, millennia, way back. So we look back, to the Stone Age. There's Stonehenge there, the same age as the pyramids. Okay, so so people feel that sense of history, and they look back at the fact that this democracy that we have was not built, didn't come out of the sky. It slowly evolved, And one of the problems in America with the system, it's because of this constitution, it's frozen in aspic. Okay? The system is so difficult to change. I know, and Howard talks about the Federal Reserve and so on. These things get sort of bound up, in this system. And really, as I've said before, the strength of a country depends on its people. It doesn't depend on a few billionaire rich kids running around at all. So you know, look, you should give everyone a fair shake in this world. I don't care who they are, where they came from, what color they are. Every kid deserves a good education and a chance for a good life, okay? And that's what government, as I said, you know, I was a manager and, you know, it's impossible for me to do everything, but it was teamwork. You relied upon your team. And so a government, you talked about G, what it should do, it should try to make every citizen a success, okay? And now, I don't believe in public ownership per se, because I believe in individual employee ownership. But there are things that governments can do by having a monopoly of things, like the mail service, like healthcare, for example. I mean, and like Social Security, you want to do away with that? I mean, goodness me! I mean, most Americans, that's the only thing they've got left to look forward to. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, do you want to do away with that? You want to privatize it? Oh goodness! And leave it up to the hands of a few lawyers in these private insurance companies. Good luck. No, they've proved. I went through a few things. They've proved what they are, and they're the same. You know, this greed, this virus of greed has infected the world, and it wrecks things. Unless you know, basically, as I've said before, this country's armed up to its teeth, and there's so much discontent. You know, yes, people have given up in the government, you know, and I don't blame them. I've given up too. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Hillary or Donald Trump either, for various reasons, but both equally deplorable, to coin a phrase. You know, unless, well, you know, there's oftentimes there has to be a major defeat, major war for things to change. Well, I certainly wouldn't want to see a major war here, nor would anybody else. But you know,
except John Bolton.
Well, yeah, John Bolton's another character. You know, he doesn't. He's never seen a war he doesn't want to start, sort of thing. You know, very dangerous person. But so yes, if government is really controlled by the few, then it's corrupt, and this is what we see. We see a corrupt government. Now, how do you get rid of it? Well, it's up to the people, really. It's up to the people. By the way, I think the young people really are waking up. I think the fact that they're fed up with gun violence. I mean, fancy going to high school and be worried about being you know, half your class being shot up. I mean, it really is. It doesn't make any sense. But when you have these gun-crazed lunatics running, I mean, really. Albert.
I'm going to suggest what I think might be a major G that you left out and see your comments on it, and that is golf, given how many times our past president played golf instead of doing his job.
You mean that game that's a nice walk in the countryside wasted? Albert, you know, look, you know, as I say, the media, you know, the media is under control of these people that really have no respect for the truth, have no respect for morality or anything else. I don't know what it takes to get back at simple integrity in this world. I do not know. But what I do know is, unless you have fair dealing in this world, and certainly you can't have the CIA running around, you know, causing havoc, backed up by a, you know, overpaid military. You know, the things that America does are often unknown to Americans, but well known to most people outside America. I mean, they see what's going on. You know, I swear that Tony Blair got together with Bush over this Iraq war, and the deal was very simple. We go to Iraq, we steal all their oil, and by the way, BP gets so much of it, and you know, ExxonMobil gets another, you know, blah blah blah. I'm sure that was the deal. And look at the disaster it's been. It's a total wreckage. However, you know, what I would say is about this, humanity goes on, unless it totally destroys itself, which it well could. And I think in the end, things do change. I mean, for example, you know, in the French Revolution is a case in point. You had this massive, corrupt, aristocratic elite, and one day they got their heads chopped off. There was a, you know, out of which came Napoleon, by the way, who was the commandant of the Paris militia, and from that position he vaulted up to becoming emperor and attacking Russia and so on and so forth. But even he was done in by Wellington. I think I'm done.
Yeah, we can get it.
I will retreat. Well, at least I wasn't shocked.
Everybody left the guns at the door.
Yeah, it was nasty.
Okay, now it's your turn to talk. So anybody who wants to comment on what the speaker had to say, either for or against, you got 5 minutes.
Well, there's quite a few G's there. You know, when I think of the G, I think of the Masons because they got the big G in the Masonic lodges. And I think, you know, some people think that's for God, but I think it's also for geometry, believe it or not. And they understand geometry. That's the whole point of being a Mason, I think, is that they understand the symbolism of the geometries that are used. But as far as guns go, a lot of what people don't realize is that guns do a lot more good than they do bad. In fact, for every person that's killed by gun violence, there are said to be 80 people whose lives were saved. That they were threatened and they were able to defend themselves because they owned a gun. That's an 80-to-1 ratio. It would be worth it at a 2-to-1 ratio, but we're talking about 80-to-1. Certainly our country is more secure because we have so many well-armed people. And as infiltrated as we are by globalists who are seeking to destroy the United States, it's probably a very good thing that we're well-armed. The other thing was on the Cold War, to spend money on military, you have to have a bad guy because you got to scare people into paying taxes and funding the military. I think that probably a lot of this Cold War between Russia and the United States over the past 100 years was largely fabricated in order to facilitate military-industrial complex being developed. I think they probably knew it wasn't going to happen, but heck, you know, if you could scare people into spending trillions of dollars on defense spending, and a lot of that money, you know, you get that hammer that's $1,000 or the toilet seat that's $20,000. A lot of that ends up in corrupting our government. And what we have also is with the CIA being the largest sex trafficking, drug running organization in the world today. You speak of the greed is the people in our government. The people that are seeking to keep the poor in their place, keep the people in their place. They don't want us to have guns. They don't want us to have any money, because if you have money, then you got money to go buy guns. And they want us kept in our place. they don't want people revolting. They don't want people saying, hey, he's being too corrupt or greedy. We need to rise up and go have a hanging party. But that's probably what we need in this country, and hopefully we will have it one of these days.
Brian, I respect your opinions a lot, but you made one bad misstatement. Those toilet seats never cost $19,000.
Oh,
$17,000 was the maximum. Oh my gosh, there's so much here to go over. I thought that was a great presentation. Of course, I don't agree with all of it. And the major one, again, just like you have spoken, is guns. Again, Kennesaw, Georgia, when was that, in the 70s or 80s?
1983.
83, passed an ordinance requiring every household in the city to have a firearm and ammunition unless they had a felon in the house or religious differences against it. Crime in the next 2 years went down 89% in Kennesaw across the boards, and it has remained there. In Georgia itself, throughout the whole state, it went down during that period of time 10%. Norway has the highest private gun ownership in Western Europe and the lowest murder rate. Belgium, as I understand, has the highest murder rate and the lowest gun possession rate. And those statistics go on and on and on and on. There's the story of the lady down in Killeen who was at the restaurant that the man crashed into. She reached for her gun and remembered she'd left it in her car and watched her parents being murdered by this guy. She could have taken him out right then. A man stabbing people in a Walmart a few years ago was stopped immediately by a guy who was carrying a gun. So in this country, we have a huge diversity of people. We're going to have conflicts for a long time because humanity is still in a very primitive state of development, in my opinion. In England, you had a much more cohesive, even kind of a population. So I think England was much more governable than the United States. And I think, however, with immigration policies in all of Europe, those countries are finding a huge change. There are areas in almost all those countries you can't even go today if you want to stay alive, if you're not Muslim. And it goes on and on and on. Gosh, there's so many things I wanted to cover here.
Would you like to go or would you prefer to stay?
Let's see. Originally, our Constitution was titled Constitution for the United States of America, not of the United States of America. Look at the subtle difference. When it's for the United States, it's the people writing the Constitution for the government they set up, and it shall obey those laws, and it's not doing it now. And they subtly passed or started publishing it, Constitution of the United States to govern the people. This country was born in the time when we could have town hall meetings. You can't have a town hall meeting in a megalopolis like Dallas today. And that is the big problem. We need to learn how to get the control of government, the interest of the people, back into the people's hands. And first thing to start with, I think, is getting rid of the Federal Reserve System, which has never been passed as an amendment. There's been research done on this to all of the different states. So many states have to ratify the bill for it to be an amendment to the Constitution. It's never been passed. It's always been illegal. It's always been criminal. The Internal Revenue Service was created by the same group of people at the Jekyll Island meeting. Read the book Preacher from Jekyll Island. That is the collection agency for the Federal Reserve System. When the Treasury printed all the money, the government borrowed from itself. There was no interest. Our income taxes pay the interest to that private bank on the national debt because the government has to borrow from the Federal Reserve now since the Treasury doesn't publish money, and they publish it all the time. When it comes to things like overthrowing Libya, which had a gold-backed dinar, which the Rothschild banking system was willing to destroy a country over. And they killed, what, 600,000 people doing it? Our CIA, getting all the money they want from the Federal Reserve, financed and armed 250,000 Al-Qaeda to march into that country and create hell. Some of you here have gotten to know and gone to lectures by the Moriartys, Jimmy and Joy Moriarty, who were on the ground when the Libyan war happened. They watched NATO helicopter gunships come into that city they were in and mow down on the streets men, women, and children, bomb hospitals and bomb schools. NATO? To hell with NATO and to hell with the EU. I think one of the greatest things in recent times is this Brexit movement, and I hope it happens. All of these globalists are the most evil people on earth. They talk about, free trade and all of that. Well, NAFTA and GATT moved all those manufacturing companies overseas and put so many people in poverty in this country. Banking, read the book, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. I mentioned that 100 times. Food, you were talking about gluttony. That is a big problem in the United States. There was an interview, I've mentioned this before, of a fellow who had retired from the pharmaceutical industry late at night, and the interview was jerked off the internet before it was even finished, but a friend was reporting it. The man said that all pharmaceutical drugs are designed not to cure a disease, but to mask the symptoms of the disease, so that the doctors can manage your disease, so that they can continue collecting money from you for the rest of your life. And that, here's the clue, the big one, all pharmaceutical drugs contain in them other chemicals, so that if you continue to take that drug over a period of time, you will develop another disease for which they have another pharmaceutical drug, and another and another and another. And why do you think older people are on so many drugs today? This is a criminal organization. There are companies up east that design chemical food taste, and they'll have companies like chain restaurants come in and decide, well, we want this one. Then nobody else will get that set of chemicals, and it could be 20-some odd chemicals. Have you ever wondered why anywhere you go, no matter where they get their potatoes from, McDonald's French fries taste the same anywhere in the world? It's because they're chemically tasted. Flavor. Everybody wants to be generous and kind to other people, but go on the internet and look up the video Immigration Gumballs, or Immigration by the Numbers. The massive overpopulation of this earth will destroy the entire planet. We cannot handle all of it. We can't even handle all of our own problems. We don't have children here who can afford to get a good education. We don't have people here who can afford to get proper medical treatment. That's another reason I think that the industries wanted Libya destroyed, because Gaddafi nationalized the oil industry, made the Hunt brothers real angry, but he took 49% of that income and ran the country, and 51% of it went to the tribal council, which he set up after he moved in as a military dictator to prevent the constant warfare between two major tribes in that country that were making it one of the worst countries in Africa and the poorest. It ended up being the most wealthy and the most peaceful, and even though he was basically Arab, all women were equal in that country, all blacks were equal. A woman could own her own car and drive it anywhere she wanted. She didn't have to wear burqas. She could rise to any position she qualified by her intelligence and training to do in a business, or start her own company. That was Gaddafi's rule, and everything, of course, who believes that? Because everything we had in our news media was 180 degrees the opposite of the truth on Libya. 180 degrees the opposite of the truth. So you cannot trust your news media, folks. We had a presenter here a few weeks ago who started out by saying, I get all my information from MSNBC News. Well, you know, it was time to walk out, except I was running the damn camera. Anyway, you're gonna shorten my time, Tom, is that?
You're over 5 minutes.
Oh, shoot.
Only 10 minutes?
Well, I've got just a few things to say here. It seems that guns always come up in these discussions, and they're always maligned and stuff like that. And I'd just like to point out a few things. First of all, David Hogg and his cadre of fellow travelers are not an intrinsic natural movement of kids. George Soros paid for busing in dozens of buses full of people to Washington, D.C. to support that demonstration they had. And I don't even think he was going to school at that Parkland school. He was going to school somewhere else. But anyway, be that as it may, when guns are banned, literally banned, inevitably genocide follows. And a group called Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, I think their website is jpfo.org or something like that, they wrote a book about it. And they listed all of the gun control laws that were passed in the 20th century where guns were taken away from the people, and in every instance, without exception, genocide followed. Every instance, there were no exceptions. Okay, you can go to 1915 when the Turks took guns from the Armenians. They killed 1.5 million of them. You can go to 1917 when the Soviets took guns from their people. 30 million at least, probably 100 million. The Chinese, same thing. Okay, Cambodia, Pol Pot, 1.5 million people at least. Genocide always follows gun bans. Another thing to think about is London just surpassed New York in murders. And guns are banned in London. There were knife murders. Okay, so now what are we going to do? Are we going to ban knives so you don't have kitchen knives? So you can't cut your tomatoes up? Well, how are you going to cut your tomatoes up without a knife? That's a pretty good question. Because it's not the weapon that kills people. People kill people. They just change whatever weapon they have. I mean, it was going on long before guns even existed. So you're not gonna get rid of guns and get rid of crime. And even if you do ban guns, it doesn't get rid of them because criminals don't obey the law. The gun banners don't seem to have figured that out. Because when you ban guns, the only people that you're going to ban guns from are honest, law-abiding people who would use them for a good purpose, like defending themselves or someone else. When you ban them, the criminals are still going to have them because they don't care what the law says. They do whatever they want.
I feel like saying, hey,
Well, yeah. Ban racial.
Speak.
Speak your piece.
Here, look,
He's hesitating.
Okay, I'm not much of a public speaker. I was 72 when I got my first opportunity to speak publicly when some Labour MPs called me in 2002 when Tony Blair came to visit G.W. Bush in his ranch in Crawford. These Labour MPs asked me to speak out. They're totally against going to war in Iraq and totally against Tony Blair, their own leader. I'm waiting for the genocide to come in Australia because a couple of years ago, so only 2 or 3 years ago, the Australian government bought back all the high caliber weapons, compulsory bought back all the high caliber weapons in Australia and destroyed them. Up to now there's been no genocide, but murders went down by 2/3. And what was it? The interesting thing about it, not only murders went down by 2/3, but total crime went down by 2/3. All murders went down by 2/3. So when we talk about the Second Amendment, nobody wants to deny anybody anybody can have the guns that they want to, but who needs an assault rifle? Why do you need an assault rifle? Why can't you be content with something a bit less? And you say guns don't kill people, only people do. What about the 12-year-old girl who got a handgun from her parents, put it in a backpack, took it to school, dropped it, the gun went off and shot one of the other students? Now that wasn't a person shooting it, that was the gun itself killing people. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. I just want to say, like, well, you know, I said what I said about the town I was from is now 30% Muslim, and instead of counting the church steeples, you count the gold, silver, red mosques.
Thank you for clarifying that. Gun point, so you don't have 100%, Ken. But I go with Pol Pot and Mao Zedong and Hitler and Stalin for counting for something too. Well, I thought you were going to run down America and say the British system is so good, but I don't know if it's really not that much better than us.
Well, we don't have a constitution, thank God.
That's good. Yeah, okay, that's the point I'm a little hazy about. I thought he was going to concentrate on that, but he did not this time. So, let's go with your 3 Gs, because I think you're looking at everything through leftist glasses. I mean, you're pretty open about it. When you say that the right wing is greedy capitalists and they're the peasants at the same time, then I know you're biased, because I don't understand any other way to see that. I mean, that's just vilification. It's two derogatory terms on both ends. And I don't know which one I am. I'm not really consider myself conservative. I'm sure a conservative would not consider me conservative. But I am alarmed with some of the crazy illogical things the left has evolved into. And I would say most of the people in this room are not really, they're in the Democratic Party, a lot of them, but they're not really keeping up with how far the left has been taken over. I mean, how do you say the young people are waking up because they're joining the Democrats or they're hating Trump? When they go out and they do their public service by wearing masks and breaking things and hurting people, how does wearing a mask show you courage and integrity and citizenship? That's what they're doing. That's what Antifa is. They go out and they just keep wearing your mask and to curse and never engage in discussion. Now I'm glad we're engaging in discussion, because that's the way to go. And you know, most of us are past 50, and we're not going to change our minds real easily. But this idea of having a discussion is the salvation of our civilization. Because otherwise, if it comes to brute arms right away, that's been our history. We're trying to get out of that tribal thing. And there are forces, and some of them above us, trying to make us become tribal again. And Antifa is part of that. And they say the alt-right is part of that, which is, I see, is vanishingly small. They got the black people really riled up like crazy. Anyway, so I again don't understand the difference between Britain and America as far as one better than the other. I know there's some differences, a lot of similarities. We owe a lot to them, our heritage. But the way you presented your 3 Gs seemed like you had your leftist glasses on. Let's go with the first one, God. Well, actually you said the opposite. You said that Britain, God was causing trouble with Britain because I guess maybe you're an atheist. Maybe the new religion is atheism. I said the new religion is global warming. And so I'm going to put this on and pray for a minute. So that's the new religion. It's taken over. The old religion has had it because science has been so successful. I mean, the cars work. When I start my car and go Jesus, Jesus, or Mohammed, I go, thank God for Gauss and Galvani and all those people. They knew what they were doing. But let's go on to the second one. Guns. Oh my guns. Yeah, I heard that article too. London has surpassed New York in murder rate.
London,
London has surpassed New York.
51 murders and 50 in New York. But they haven't surpassed Chicago yet.
No, they haven't surpassed Chicago. But if they bring in some more Africans, they will. Don't worry. It'll be the same thing. Anyway, so that's without guns. So imagine if they had guns. Now, what does that say? I am for gun control. I don't want the police and the military to have guns. Then it's good. Yeah, I mean, didn't the bodies go around in my lifetime without guns? And they had a civil society. So it's down to the people. We're being manipulated like we're automotive towns. We're statistics, we're this and that. So I agree with John on one basic thing. Transparency and morality is the basics. And all this other stuff is really subordinate to that. Because, let's go on to the next one, greed. Most of the billionaires I know that are really greedy are leftists. Yes. Name the greedy billionaires by name, not just, right-wing elites.
Koch brothers.
Okay, one. I'll name you 10. And I'm not even a news person. I don't even care about this stuff.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, okay. But he's a leftist. He's a Democrat.
Yeah.
Okay, count him too. Who else? Okay, how many billionaires we got on the left? Let's see, what is that, right? We got Gates, Soros, that's a cute one.
Yeah.
Then we got all the Hollywood moguls.
Buffett.
That Pete Tenney guy.
Yeah, Bezos. I mean, to characterize this solely as a left-right thing, I think was a mistake, and that shows your bias. And I say the bias is okay. We don't kill each other for that. This is where, if we can use some other judge, logic, something besides force and vehemence, then we got a chance. But it's just a long run. It's probably not going to be in my lifetime. I agree with Albert. Our evolution is in a primitive stage. Let's go to the next one. What's the next one? Okay. Gratuitous violence. All I can say about that is that my wife brings home a lot of British movies. It's just as bad. so we copied a lot of ancient British things, but they're copying all the modern things. I don't see a difference. It's horrible. And see, then what else we got? We got gluttony, gullibility. Okay. So basically it's just this. Try to take your colored glasses off. You don't want blue glasses, you don't want red glasses. You really have to keep your independence. And the reason I kind of am alarmed right now is because the left is spouting irrational stuff, like to change the nature of the words. Like racism doesn't mean being unfair. I don't know if it's bad or good to be racist anymore. My son, who lives in Portland, which is completely left wing, he told me, if you're white, you're racist. He's white. He's got two beautiful little sons. They're white. They're born with original sin. They're racist. And if you're black, no matter what you do, you can't be racist. So I said, well, you're just redefining the word. Does it mean is it bad or is it good? Then they turn around and say, it's bad. You're racist. You're racist. You're racist. You are racist. And it's bad. But meanwhile, his innocent son is a racist. So that's just one example. It just goes on and on. Another thing with, I mentioned it with the mask. The other thing is, what kind of integrity, what are you talking about? What kind of platform are you making when you say go out and vote without proper identification? Vote multiple times, vote illegal aliens. What the hell? That's a political platform you want to lead the country with? I'm sorry. That's why they always just talk about Trump's imagined scandals with no even actual specific crime. Because they have nothing else. They have bought into the weakest-minded identitarian crap. Like, yeah, she's a woman. It's time for a woman. I don't care if she's bad. She's a woman. Oh, we need a black president. Oh, we need a woman. That's insane. That is the most primitive, tribal, base crap. We want civilization to progress. And it's being brought down. And basically what I'm saying to you all leftists out there, It's being taken over by Marxists that are really insane. Every single thing that you said is bad is worse in Marxist countries. This country's got a lot of problems. But we're spoiled. We're trying to tweak things, fine-tune things. You look at these videos where they're eating each other. The people are eating each other. They slaughter them by the millions. I mean, they're all, you know, more leftist than here, and they're more authoritarian. So we got it pretty good. We need to fix things, but it ain't going to be fixed with this left-right thing, but transparency, yes. Thank you. I didn't know about your healthcare.
Well, I know that Trump is Presbyterian, we all know that. But anyway, he's the only president, of course, that does not even accept a salary. So that does show some generosity, I think. And he gave, what, $1 million to the Haitians, and he's given he's actually received awards. The news media has not published, and was very much loved, of course, when he was a Democrat, we know that. But anyway, what was I going to say? It's hard to remember when you get up here. I always thought I could do this without notes. But anyway, as far as guns, I just don't know of any other way as a single woman to protect oneself without some kind of, you know, quick way to stop somebody if somebody should come in the house. And, oh, Australia. Actually, I read that the crime rate went up there. Now, I guess it depends where you read.
JPFO has articles about it.
Oh, yeah. And also, Australia gives certain benefits to the people there. I know if they work out and stay healthy, the government lowers their taxes and all. So, so that's, it has its good values there.
I want to thank John for his presentation again. It gives us a lot to discuss. I don't have any particular thing that he commented on that I have a comment about, but the general tone of the presentation, a famous person said, "There's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what is right with America." And cynicism will get us nowhere, giving up will get us nowhere. And as far as town hall meetings, there are so many meetings in Dallas every single day that I have to pick which one I'm going to go to. I don't know where you got the idea that there are no meetings in Dallas. And people are discussing things right and left. Another quote, "Nothing is either good or bad, only how you think of it." And of course, my ears perked up when you mentioned the Catholic Church. I was brought up in Catholic Church, and in my youth, that was goodness, everything wonderful. You know, the idealism you have in your youth. Then you get older and you start hearing about all different things, and you get cynical, and you think, oh, they're really bad. You know, they're really bad, especially this stuff that went on, and with the young boys. And a cardinal, I believe, was arrested today by the Vatican, going to be charged for having pornography. But the truth of the matter is, religion in and of itself could be either good or bad, depending upon how the person used it. And guns, I used to think that, you know, no guns at all. And I've seen some responsible people who know how to use a gun and they enjoy the gun. But what astonishes me, when issues of modifying some of the things, you know, like these assault rifles or age limits, people start yelling, "Gun banners, gun banners." People aren't trying to ban guns. They're trying to make some modifications. And statistics do show that at times that some of these guns, I cannot give you the exact thing on it now, but that it was much less, there was much less during a period when there were rules against the assault rifles. I would love to know where you got that statistic, 80 to 1.
Just Google it, you'll find it.
Google what?
Google 80 to 1.
Just Google 80 to 1.
Yeah, just 80 to 1.
Okay.
I've not heard it for years.
I've never heard that. I've heard mostly the opposite. But
That's because that's the propaganda of the left.
according to you. We're having a conversation here, I'm sorry. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I guess I'm the last one standing. Did you want to come up?
Could I
Sure.
just say?
Come on up here.
Can I
Come on up here. Do it from here.
You gotta go, why not up here?
Come on up here by the microphone.
I don't wonder whether I can or not.
Sure you can.
I might fall before I get through.
Oh, no, you'll be,
You gotta be videoed.
80 to 1.
be videoed.
Violence
All that here.
versus gun saving people.
I just wanted to look at the wider picture, the bigger picture. All the discussion tonight has been about violence and greed and things like that. The human race, from its very beginning, is nothing but violence and greed. Ever since we were animals, we've had all kinds of governments since we were just a family group to a tribe, and now it's up to Stalin controlling most of the world. It's been nothing but violence and greed. And I don't see any cure for it until we get maybe an education system, a worldwide education, that teaches people to help others instead of doing everything to help themselves. Way back, even our cartoons and everything, they're violence. We love violence. We love movies that have violence. We play games because we like to beat people. We've got to get that out of our heads. Otherwise, we're going to blow up the world and destroy the human race. And it won't matter what governments are we in.
I guess I'm the last one standing.
I have one little question. He said, ever since we were animals, when did that change?
That's right, it didn't change. Never did change. Anyway, I want to thank our speaker. They did a great job here tonight. You got us all thinking different things. It's quite. To sum this up, I would say that we have met the enemy, and it is us. I mean, that's basically, I've heard that before, but we have to get our act together. We have to do things. We're supposed to be a democracy, and we're supposed to put our things together and do what's right. On the question of, the purpose of regulation was never to put the government on the backs of people. The purpose of regulation was to harness the forces of profit and greed to make it work for society instead of against it. The deregulation leads to the free enterprise of burglars. That's what happens. That's why I'm not for deregulation. But anyway, you got to regulate things. Now, guns need to be regulated. We have a regulation now that fully automatic weapons cannot be used in society. You can't own a fully automatic weapon because you kill too many people with it. That was the reason it was put in. It was a common sense regulation. At one point in the 1990s, say 1994, in that area, they put in the assault weapons ban. But they had a problem with that because what's an assault weapon? They were calling it anything like menacing, they call it, that's an assault weapon. And then bang, they couldn't distinguish between assault and non-assault, and it turned into a big mess. Eventually it was thrown out. Now, the only distinction between assault and non-assault is automatic versus semi-automatic. Then we had the bump stocks that turned a semi-automatic and almost into a fully automatic, which is very damaging to many people. I used to go deer hunting with an M1, but there was a limit on the amount of cartridges you could put in the rifle. 5 was the limit at the time. Of course, you carried an 8-shot clip in case a bear showed up, but that didn't violate the limit. So my point is that there can be some regulations. But for example, it used to be you had to be 21 years old to own a gun. They reduced it to 18 because people were in the Army and they said, well, he's out there with the rifle. He comes back, how could he not own a gun when he's 18? So they reduced it to 18 years, and now we've got the shooting in Florida where an 18-year-old bought a semi-automatic rifle and shot up the place and killed a lot of people, which is, maybe we should go back to the 21 year. In my view, if you were to regulate it properly, you would be 21 years old for a gun, and maybe if you were in the military, you could have a gun. And if you had been in the military, you could buy a gun. But that way you would at least you had the training to use it, and you know that how deadly it can be, and you would know how to handle it. So that would limit that. Another problem is that gun owners should be required to secure their weapons. There should be a requirement that a gun owner, if you own a gun, you should have it secured. Because if someone gets a hold of that gun, like a little kid or somebody else, and shoots somebody else with it, and they cause wreck and havoc, you should be partially responsible for having allowed that, for not securing your weapon. And I think in Switzerland they require that you secure your weapons, as I recall. Anyway, my point is that would be some regulation that would help reduce the bonus crime we have on guns. I'll drop that. Corporations in this country have gotten bigger than the people. We have corporations that are bigger than countries, and it's not a good thing. We've allowed this to happen. When corporations were first found, they were found for a purpose: build a bridge, do this, do that. When they got through with it, the corporation was ended, and they put. And now a corporation lives forever, and we've changed that. A corporation also had to be. Had to owe to the country, you know, to the people that established it. That's all gone. Now they owe us the stockholder. And the stockholder has all his interest in his profit. So that's part of the problem. Corporations have left town and gone overseas where labor costs are cheaper. End result, we lost all the jobs here that we had. And we have the Midwest is turned into a rust belt. And we get the end result is the president we have also. But anyway, my point is that we need to put regulations on corporations, especially on those that have left the country to go where labor costs are cheaper. Apple, for example, produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. There's no jobs here to produce anything that Apple makes. So the end result is we buy the equipment, we buy from Apple, but how can we buy something we don't have a job to produce anything? So our economy is going into a shambles in that respect. So we need to put tariffs on corporations. Those corporations that are overseas that have left our country to go where labor costs are cheaper. That might be a better way to do it than try to put tariffs on what they're doing now. And you don't need a trade war with another country, you're going to lose. Everybody loses. So if you put it on the products of a corporation that left town, at least if an American corporation went overseas, you can put a tariff on it and say, that's it. You pay the difference of labor costs, the difference of environmental protection, the difference of transportation costs. That's what you pay in order to sell it here. And if you don't want to pay that, produce it here. Then you'll have jobs. They'll produce something here because they don't want to pay all those costs. And you'll have jobs. Then you might even think about shortening the workday. That would make a better sense, because if you look at what's going on in society, machines replace people, machines don't pay taxes, people do. Today, I'm an advocate of that. I negotiated that years ago, a 6-hour workday, and I know that works. And I know that we'd have a better society. We've got 25 million people in this country that are unemployed or underemployed, and we need to put them back to work, and that's one way of doing it. And that, to me, is what the future holds. But I better shut up while I'm ahead and give this back to our speaker.
Well, actually, thanks for the discussion. Actually, this was, on my part, just a mind exercise. You know, I thought, well, it'd be interesting to see what, because, you know, God's guns and greed, extrapolate it a bit further than that. Anyway, I'm grateful for you all for coming tonight. I'm amazed that I wasn't shot on sight with all these guns about, but I wasn't. So anyway, I count that as a small victory. I certainly wanted to provoke some discussion. I thought there would be, so I was happy about that. And as always, I tend to agree with some of you, and you tend to agree with me on some things and not others, and that's fine, because this is a talking club and not a fighting club. Otherwise, I would have come fully armed, you see.
Well, that's it for tonight. They kick us out of here at 10 o'clock, just so you know. Our speaker's here if you want to talk to them, and we'll see you all next week, hopefully.